He was a man who didn't just leave the world, he erased himself from it. No phone, no name, no past. 10 years ago, he walked away from everything he once knew: people, noise, expectations, and whatever pain had followed him for far too long. The wind never stopped howling here. It whispered through the forest like ghosts that had forgotten how to rest. Winters were long, brutal, and unforgiving. Temperatures dropped low enough to kill a man in hours. But not him. He adapted. He learned the language of survival, the way animals moved, the way the wind shifted before a storm, the sound of danger hidden beneath silence. Every morning he woke before sunrise, his breath visible in the cold air. He stepped outside into a world untouched by humanity, where every footprint in the snow told a story. His routine never changed. Hunt, chop wood, fix what's broken, stay alive. He tracked deer through deep snow with patience that bordered on instinct. He cut firewood until his hands turned rough and scarred. He carried water, repaired the cabin, and prepared for storms that could last days. He spoke no words. Weeks would pass, sometimes months, without a single human sound leaving his mouth. At first, the silence felt strange, heavy, unnatural. But over time, it became his only comfort. The world he left behind was loud, too loud, full of people who talked too much, lied too easily, and left wounds that didn't heal. Out here, there were no lies, no expectations, no disappointments. Only survival, only truth. Years passed, and the man changed. His hair grew long and wild, his beard thick and untamed. His face hardened under harsh weather, carved by cold winds and endless solitude. His hands became strong but worn, marked by cuts, scars, and years of labor. His eyes, once normal, now carried something deeper, something distant, something tired. He had become part of the wilderness itself. He trusted no one, needed no one, expected nothing. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Because in the quietest moments, when the fire burned low and the wind outside softened into a distant whisper, something crept in, a feeling he could not, a silence that felt different, not peaceful, empty. It didn't matter how strong he became or how well he survived. There was something missing, something human, something he buried the day he chose to disappear. And no matter how deep into the wilderness he ran, he couldn't escape it. Still, he refused to go back. He refused to break. Because this life, this cold, silent, unforgiving life, was the only one he believed he deserved. And for 10 long years, nothing changed. Until one night, everything would.
That night, the silence felt different. The wind was stronger than usual, howling through the trees like something alive, restless, searching. Snow fell heavily, covering the ground in a thick white blanket, erasing every trace of movement, every sign of life. Inside the cabin, the man sat near the fire, sharpening his knife with slow, practiced movements. The soft scrape of metal against stone echoed quietly in the room. This was his routine, predictable, controlled, safe. But then, a sound broke through the storm. A knock, sharp, sudden, unnatural. The man froze. For a moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. His eyes lifted slowly toward the door, every instinct inside him instantly alert. His world did not allow surprises. Not here, not this deep in the wilderness. No one came here. No one should even know this place existed. He told himself it was the wind, just the storm playing tricks. Then it came again. Another knock, louder this time, more desperate. His grip tightened around the knife. Every survival instinct screamed at him to stay still, to remain silent, to let whatever was outside leave on its own, because nothing good ever arrived uninvited. Slowly, carefully, he stood up. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath his weight. His eyes never left the door. The fire behind him flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the cabin walls. Another knock. This time, it wasn't just sound. It was a plea. Something or someone was out there, and they weren't leaving. Step by step, he moved closer to the door, each movement controlled, cautious. His hand hovered near the handle, but he didn't open it immediately. Years of isolation had taught him one rule above all: trust nothing. But something about this moment felt different. Not dangerous, not yet. Just human. Finally, after a long breath, he pulled the door open. The storm rushed in instantly, cold air slamming into him like a force. Snow swirled violently through the doorway, carried by the wind. And there she was. A woman stood on the other side. Barely. She was trembling, her body weak from exhaustion. Snow clung to her hair and clothes, her face pale from the cold. Her breathing was uneven, heavy, like she had been running for a long time. Too long. Her clothes were torn in places, stained with dirt and struggle. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes, they told the real story. Fear. Not ordinary fear. The kind that comes from being chased, from running with no idea if you'll survive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other. Two completely different lives, colliding in one frozen second. The man's face remained hard, unreadable, but inside, something shifted. This was the first human being he had seen in years, and she had just appeared at his door like a ghost from a life he had buried. The woman tried to speak, but her voice cracked before words could form. She didn't need to explain. Her condition said enough. She had come from somewhere dangerous. And somehow, she had found him, the last man on earth, who wanted to be found. Time felt frozen between them. The storm roared around them, but in that moment, nothing else existed. Just him and her, standing at the edge of two different worlds. And without knowing it, everything had already begun to change.
For a few seconds, he just stood there. The cold wind rushed past him, snow swirling into the cabin, but he didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on hers, studying, questioning, searching for any sign of danger. She looked like she could collapse at any moment. Her body trembled uncontrollably, her breath shallow and uneven. The storm had drained everything from her: strength, warmth, hope. She had nothing left. And yet, she was still standing. That alone told him something. Slowly, without saying a word, he stepped aside. It was a small movement, but it meant everything. The woman hesitated for just a second, as if unsure whether to trust him. But the cold behind her was merciless. She had no other choice. She stepped inside. The moment she crossed the doorway, the storm disappeared behind her. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around her like something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Her legs gave out. She collapsed near the fire, catching herself just before hitting the ground completely. Her hands reached forward, instinctively pulling closer to the heat. Her fingers were red, nearly frozen. The man shut the door behind her, sealing the storm outside once again. Silence returned. But this silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, filled with presence. He didn't rush to help her. He didn't ask questions. He simply watched. Years of isolation had made him cautious. Every move mattered. Every detail could mean survival or danger. She stayed close to the fire, breathing slowly, trying to regain control of her body. The warmth slowly brought life back into her frozen skin. Her shaking eased, but the fear in her eyes remained. She looked up at him. He stood a few steps away, still, unreadable, like a wall. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Two strangers, sharing the same space, but living in completely different worlds. Finally, her voice broke the silence, soft, weak. I didn't know where else to go. Her words came slowly, each one heavy with exhaustion. I've been walking for hours, maybe days. I lost track. He didn't respond. His eyes stayed on her, calm but sharp. He wasn't interested in stories, not yet. Words could lie, but fear didn't lie. She pulled her arms closer to herself, still trying to warm up. Her body was recovering, but her mind was still running, still trapped in whatever she had escaped from. I didn't mean to come here, she added, almost like an apology.
I just saw the light. That made him pause. The light. For 10 years, that small cabin had been invisible to the world, hidden, forgotten. And yet, she had found it. Or maybe she had been led to it. He turned slightly, grabbing a thick cloth from a nearby shelf. Without speaking, he tossed it toward her. It landed beside her quietly. A simple gesture. But in his world, that was everything. She looked at it, then at him. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not panic. Gratitude. Small, fragile, but real. She wrapped the cloth around herself, holding it tight as if it was the only thing keeping her together. The fire crackled softly between them. Minutes passed. Still no questions, still no trust. But something had changed. The man who had spent 10 years avoiding human contact was now sharing his space with a stranger. And the woman who had been running from something unknown had just stepped into the safest place she could find. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was alive.
The next morning, everything felt unfamiliar. Not because the world had changed, but because he wasn't alone in it anymore. The man woke up before sunrise, just like always. His body followed the same routine it had followed for 10 years. But this time, something was different. There was another presence inside the cabin. He glanced toward the fire. She was still there, sleeping quietly, wrapped in the cloth he had given her, her breathing slow and steady. The fear on her face had softened, replaced, at least for now, by something closer to peace. For a moment, he just stood there, watching. Not with suspicion this time, but with something unfamiliar. Awareness. He turned away quickly, as if even that small moment meant too much. Outside, the world was still frozen. Snow covered everything, untouched and silent. He stepped out, the cold air hitting his face like a reminder of the life he understood. This was his world. Simple. Controlled. Alone. He grabbed his axe and began chopping wood. Each strike echoed through the quiet forest, sharp and steady. This was how he cleared his mind. This was how he stayed in control. But even out here, his thoughts weren't as quiet as they used to be. Back inside the cabin, the woman slowly opened her eyes. For a second, she didn't move, just listened. The fire crackled softly, and the distant sound of wood being chopped reached her ears. She sat up carefully, still weak, but stronger than before. Her eyes moved around the cabin, taking everything in. The tools, the structure, the simplicity of a life built only for survival. Then she noticed something. There were no personal things. No photos, no memories, no signs of a past. It was as if the man who lived here never existed before this place. When he returned carrying firewood, she looked at him differently this time, not just with fear, but curiosity. "You live like this, every day?" she asked softly. He paused. For a moment, it seemed like he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "Yes." Just one word, but it carried years behind it. She nodded slowly, trying to understand a life so far from anything she had known. Later, as the day passed, small moments began to form. She helped where she could, adding wood to the fire, organizing small things, watching how he moved, how he worked. At first, he resisted it. He didn't need help, didn't want it, but she didn't push. She simply stayed. And that made all the difference. By the time evening came, the silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy. It was shared. They sat across from each other near the fire, the light flickering between them. Shadows danced across the wooden walls as the storm outside calmed into a quiet night. "Why did you come out here?" she asked. This time, the question stayed in the air longer. He didn't answer right away. His eyes lowered slightly, the firelight reflecting in them. Then he said, "I didn't belong out there." Simple, but final. She didn't ask more, because she understood something important in that moment. Some stories don't need words, and some walls aren't meant to be broken all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, and without realizing it, they had already started to fall.
That night, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same. It felt heavier. The fire burned low, casting slow, shifting shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost unnatural, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The man noticed it immediately. Silence like this wasn't normal. He sat still, listening. Every small sound mattered. The woman, sitting near the fire, sensed it too. She looked at him, her expression tightening. Something in his posture had changed, his body alert, his eyes focused, no longer calm. Then, a sound. Soft, distant. Footsteps, crunching against the snow. The man's eyes snapped toward the door. There was no doubt now. Someone was out there. He stood up slowly, every movement controlled, precise. His entire body shifted into survival mode, like a switch had been flipped inside him. The woman's face went pale. She knew that sound. "They found me," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. The man didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The fear in her voice told him everything. He moved quickly, grabbing what he could use, an axe, a heavy tool, anything that could become a weapon if needed. His breathing stayed steady, but his mind was sharp, calculating every possibility. Another step outside. Closer this time. Then another. The sound circled the cabin slowly, deliberately. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were searching. The woman backed away from the door, her body shaking again, but this time not from the cold. From memory. From whatever she had escaped. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "They never do." The man glanced at her for a brief second, and in that moment, something changed. For 10 years, he had lived for one purpose: survive alone. But now, he wasn't alone, and survival meant something different. The footsteps stopped, right outside the door. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, a knock. Hard. Violent. Nothing like before. The woman flinched. The man didn't move. Another bang against the door. Stronger. Demanding. The wood shook slightly under the force. Whoever was outside wasn't asking. They were coming in. The man tightened his grip on the axe, his eyes locked on the door. Every instinct inside him was alive, sharper than ever before. This wasn't just about him anymore. This cabin, this life, and the woman behind him were now all connected. Another strike hit the door, louder, cracking the silence completely. The line had been crossed, and for the first time in 10 years, the man who chose isolation was about to fight for something other than himself.
The banging stopped. Not suddenly, but slowly, like whatever was outside had made its decision. Inside the cabin, the air felt frozen. The man stood still, his grip tight on the axe, every muscle in his body ready to react. His eyes never left the door. Time stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, silence. Deep, unnatural. The kind of silence that comes after something has already happened. He didn't move immediately. Years of survival had taught him patience. Rushing into the unknown was a mistake you didn't survive twice. Behind him, the woman barely breathed. Her fear filled the room, thick and suffocating. But there was something else now. Hope. Because for the first time since she started running, she wasn't alone. Minutes passed. Then slowly, carefully, the man stepped closer to the door. Every step measured, every sound controlled. He reached out, his hand hovering near the handle. For a brief moment he paused, listening one last time. Nothing. He opened the door. The cold night air rushed in again, sharp and unforgiving. Snow covered everything outside, glowing faintly under the dim light of the sky. But the footsteps were gone. The presence, gone. Only the wind remained. The forest stood still, silent as if nothing had ever happened. But the man knew better. Things like this didn't just end. They changed. He stepped outside, scanning the area with sharp, experienced eyes. Tracks in the snow told a story, but not a clear one.
Whoever had come here had left. For now. He stood there for a long moment, the cold biting into his skin, but he barely felt it, because something inside him had already shifted. He turned back towards the cabin, towards her. When he stepped inside again, she looked at him, not with fear this time, but with trust. Real trust. The kind that isn't given easily. The kind that's earned in moments like this. "Are they gone?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. Yes. Just one word. But it carried something new. Reassurance. She closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her like a wave. Her body relaxed for the first time since she arrived. The constant tension inside her began to fade. And in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not words, not promises, but understanding. The man placed the axe down slowly. The sound echoed softly through the cabin, but it felt different now, less like a weapon, and more like something he no longer needed to hold on to so tightly. For 10 years, he had lived with one belief, that being alone was the only way to survive, that isolation was safety, that connection only brought pain. But tonight, that belief cracked, because when danger came, he didn't run, he didn't hide, he stayed. For her, the cabin no longer felt like just a shelter. It felt shared, alive in a different way. The fire burned a little warmer, the silence felt a little softer, and the man who once erased himself from the world was no longer invisible. Not completely. He looked at her one last time before turning away, but something in his expression had changed. Not weakness, not fear, something stronger, something human. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew life as they knew it would never be the same again.